Today we have a special guest with us. Her name is Lily. She is actually from the Philippines. Lily, of course, is very dear to my heart since she and I are actually getting married, so she must be very dear to my heart. I met Lily several years ago while I was visiting churches in the Philippines, and I really loved getting to know her and her culture. And since last week we were talking about how, a lot of times we confuse different things like racial differences versus cultural differences, and sometimes what we confuse to be racial differences are actually cultural differences, because our culture sometimes changes how the things that we practice, the things that we believe, things like that are often influenced by our culture. So today we want to talk about that a little more, and I thought what better way to talk about it than to talk to someone from a very different culture, someone on the very opposite side of the world. And we're going to talk to them because obviously she's been getting to know me over the years, so she'll have a little bit of an idea on the differences between her culture and my culture. So we're going to go ahead and talk about that. So Lily, what would you say is perhaps the biggest difference between our two cultures? Since you've gotten to know me, you've heard a little bit about me, my family, my culture. What would you say is the biggest difference?
I guess how Filipino don't usually move out from their family after they graduated, or they're not even expecting to move out until they would say that I'm gonna have my family, so I'm gonna move out. But even if on that point they would even say that I'm gonna stay here, so even though that first family already got grandchildren, they're still living in the same house, in which in your place some leaves their houses or leaves your home with the specific age.
And in a recent video that I did with the senior pastor here, we talked about how oftentimes there's two sides to a coin, right? We look at someone, let's say from the Filipino culture, and from the American culture, we might say something like that's different from ours. We might maybe judge that and say it's wrong, but really it seems as though they're looking at it from a different side of the coin. Not that it's wrong, but rather they're just looking at it from a different side of the coin, if that makes sense. For example, you're talking about how sometimes the couples live together with the family, and that happens in America sometimes too. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but generally if it does happen in America, it's a transition. Usually couples don't move in with their parents and think we're going to be here the rest of our lives. It's almost always this is temporary, we're just trying to get on our feet. That's generally how it's seen. And one of the reasons for that is because of privacy. Generally, Americans, they like privacy. So moving in with your parents doesn't give you a lot of privacy. And kind of, as you said, with the individuality, if they're kind of living with their family, still living under the same roof as their family, the parents can say, if you're living in my house, you have to live by my rules. But by this point, if they're married, I'm assuming that they've already kind of become an adult. They've kind of already started making rules for themselves, and they might have personal preferences, and those preferences might clash with that of their parents or that of their in-laws. So you can see that there's, of course, value in the Filipino culture, in which they're very collective, they're very family oriented, but there's also value in the individual perspective, where each person is an individual, each person needs privacy, things like that. So could you talk a little bit about the privacy value, how the Filipinos value privacy?
Well, I guess I could say that Filipino tend to value privacy lesser. Yeah, a little lesser than I guess with your culture. It is very common for us, to like be in the same room, like living in the same room, like the whole family, like the mother, the father, and even the kids. But even with the friends, even if they are already fully grown, they would even want to go to someone's house and sleep over there, bring their things there, and stay with them, because like they want that closeness, not just with the family, but also with the friends, because we really love to socialize.
Yeah, exactly. I remember when I was studying different cultures in college, one of the things that they talked about was, I think it was Indonesian culture, which would probably be somewhat similar to Filipino culture because they're very close in area. So chances are there's a little bit of similarity. And they were talking about how this missionary, he went to Indonesia and he saw these two people. They both owned land, beachfront land. In America, beachfront land is great. Everyone wants beachfront land, living next to the beach. And he looked out and he saw miles and miles of land in both directions, but yet the houses were right next to one another. And the missionary said, "You have all this land. Why did you build right next to somebody?" And the person said, "Because I'd get lonely if I didn't." It was just this idea that in American culture, we would want that privacy. We would even, in some cases, build walls to add to that privacy. But these people in this culture, they love socializing so much. They love socializing over their privacy. They valued it more than their privacy, and as a result, they built right next to one another. And you know, there's value in that, of course. And in some cases, maybe Americans, they like their privacy too much. I don't know. Of course, we want privacy, right? We don't want to do everything out in the open. But the point is, in some cases, I've seen that as a difference. And we talked about a little bit how sometimes couples, they'll even stay with the parents, not all the time, but sometimes couples will live in the same house with the parents. But also sometimes people, after they move out of the family, I've heard this is very common for them to actually send money back. And in some cases, I guess I've got two questions here. First question is, I've heard that in the Philippines, the family makes more of the decisions than the individual. And in American society, that's very complicated for us. We're thinking, what do you mean the family makes decisions? So things like where you'll go to college or where you'll work, things like this, it's discussed by the family, and the family kind of decides, is that true?
Well, that is kind of true, that really it is the parents tries to influence the decision of their kids and their life decision, even in their future, like who's gonna be with them in the future. Like they could choose anyone, but of course the family would say yes or no still. But and even with I guess with school, with work, they tend to make a say with that. And that is true that in Filipino culture it is very common to where the parents expect the kids that if ever they are fully grown and they have work already, they're gonna send money for them. Because some of them, I guess not everyone now, because some Filipinos are also been affected with other cultures, and they've seen how it works, how disadvantages comes to that point. But some Filipinos still do it. How they're gonna say that instead of doing the thing that they wanted to do, they're gonna do the things that their parents want them to do, and would work instead of themselves to like supposedly to save, especially if you're like a man, like you need to save for your future. But they would rather give it to their family because they say, I'm gonna bring back what my parents did for me, so I'm gonna provide for them. But not everyone does that, because like I said, they're already influenced. But major Filipino, or most of the Filipinos still did that thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I see so much value in that thinking, but at the same time, as an American, I'm sure any Americans listening to this right now are like, wait, what? Because that's not how we're raised. We're raised to be individuals. We're raised to start our own families, not to necessarily help the families that we came from. And of course, saying it like that, it sounds kind of bad. But in Filipino culture, a lot of times they're raised to think as a family group. They're raised to think about the family. What decisions they make affects the family. So, for example, if you don't go to college, or you do go to college, or you go to a bad college or something like that, it could affect the family because it could affect your work in the future, and your work in the future affects your income in the future, and the income affects how much you can send home to your family. So a lot of times the family seems to make those decisions, right? They tend to, like the parents you were saying, the parents try to influence the decision on where they'll go to college, where they're going to work, and also who they're going to marry. I found it kind of interesting because we know in America, we know that there are cultures out there that have arranged marriages. And the Philippines is not one of them, but it's somewhat similar in the sense that unless you're like, 25 or something like that, you can't get married without your parents' permission. And I remember when you and I, when we were first considering getting married in the Philippines, I went down there and I had to get my parents' permission, signed permission, because of course they're not going to come with me. I had to get my parents to sign permission to say that our son, who is old enough, he's a pastor, he can marry other people, but he needs our permission to marry someone in the Philippines. So it was very, very strange to me to think that I needed my parents' permission to get married. But in the Philippines, you do need your parents' permission up to a certain age, and then once you reach a certain age, you have to still have their advice or something like that. And the point is, looking at it from two sides of the coin, on one side, yes, we are individuals, of course, and I think America gets that right. But also, we're families, and I think the Philippines gets that right. And when we make decisions, of course, think how it's going to impact us as individuals, but also think about how it's going to impact us as a family group, because what we do does impact other people, the lifestyles that we choose, the jobs that we choose, all these different things, they impact other people. So what are kind of your thoughts on that, this American concept that, we don't always send money back to our parents, of course. It's just this idea that we're raised to become independent of our family, not to continue to benefit the family, if that makes sense. I don't know. It seems kind of rude.
Oh, yes. I guess that is true, that it is a need to have the balance, especially with us, because we're gonna have a family, and you and I are from like a very, very different culture, like how we do things, how we act, how we say things, and how we even do stuff, because even our meals or our snacks is your meals, so we're gonna have the thing with that. But then with the balance of that, yeah, of course there are even some point in Filipinos now where even the television, the novels or stuff, they would even show how Filipino culture is having disadvantages. I remember one of the movie we watched maybe 2 days ago. It was an old lady. She's alone. I mean, that makes sense. That she wants her daughter to be right beside her. But she's pretty old, and her daughter is around maybe 30 already. But then she haven't even have a boyfriend yet. And the mom was it's a Filipino movie, by the way. And then they were the mom would no, yeah, I don't want to I don't want you to have a boyfriend, because I want you to take care of me. And because she is already old and she's alone. But then at the end of that movie, it says that it is okay to be close with your family, because we value being close with their family, especially with that specific moment where her mother is alone. She doesn't have her husband anymore. But then it's not the reason for us to give up our own thing, because I always say it before, I guess, with myself, I guess, is that as we already need to think about the fact that we already did our decision making with our lives before, and we just need to like maybe influence a little bit or nurture them. I mean, nurture them to get better with their decision making, but we don't have to like control the whole situation of their lives, because they need to grow too.
And I know that from an American perspective, we would look at that particular mother and that story and say, she's being selfish. She's putting her wants above the needs and desires of her daughter. And I know I've heard stories, and I don't want to sound mean to like your culture, but I've heard stories of people who were barely making enough money to survive, and they're still sending home money to their parents. And I'm like, take care of yourself. If you can't take care of yourself, then you're not going to ever be able to keep sending money back unless you continue to make money. So it's just, there's a little bit of, from an American culture, it seems almost like it's selfish. But of course, like I said, there's a little bit of value from both sides. And just trying to wrap this up and talk about what should we be doing as Christians? Which of us is more Christian, if you will? Which culture is more Christian? And again, it's looking at different sides of the coin. One is looking at the independent side of how we're all individuals, right? God is going to judge us on an individual basis, but at the same time, God sometimes judges us on a group basis. What does the family do? What does the church do? What does Paul was writing to the church when he found out that there was some immorality going on. He wrote to the entire church saying, why didn't you fix this? Why didn't you discipline this person for, I think the situation was he was sleeping with his mother-in-law. It's like, why is this the case? So in some cases, God does look at us as a group, but also he looks at us as individuals. So we have to look at both sides of the coin. But then, of course, we know the Bible says to honor our father and our mother. And I think Filipinos, they do that very well. But at the same time, we also have to remember the Bible. Jesus himself said, for this reason shall a man leave his father and mother and shall cleave to his wife, and they shall become one. So there is a moment where they are supposed to be independent. There is a moment where they are supposed to branch out and start their own family. That doesn't necessarily mean that you should start dishonoring your parents. But at the same time, it's a reminder, there is a time we leave our mother and father, and we have to become. Good morning, everyone, again, I guess. All right, today's title is in Hebrew. It comes from Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, and it is Bereshit bara Elohim, and it's basically where we understand it as, in beginning created God, and it goes on to talk about the universe. Oh yeah, the children can be dismissed for Children's Church. I always forget that part. So we know that in the beginning God created the universe, the heavens, and the earth. But the reason I was inspired to talk about this topic was I was thinking to myself, what is something that parents often talk to their kids about? Kind of specifically Christian parents talking to their kids. What is something that they talk about? And of course, there's probably many different things. Don't do drugs, stuff like that. But one common thing that I find is that parents often warn their kids, try and prepare their kids for things like science class or colleges and things like that. And they try to prepare their kids saying, when you're there, you're probably going to find at least one professor out there who's going to mock you for being a Christian, who's going to tell you that God doesn't exist. They're going to tell you that science is disproving God, things like that. And it's always just such a crazy thing. I was talking to one of the youth somewhat recently, it was several months ago, and they were saying that one of their science teachers told them that evolution has already disproven God, which evolution is a theory, so a theory can't disprove something. But the point is, a lot of times Christianity is being attacked in schools and colleges and things like that. And today I want to talk about how Christianity shouldn't be attacked, right? Many times parents, they'll tell their kids, they'll prepare them, they'll warn them saying, you're going to be attacked. But they won't exactly give them ways to defend themselves. The Bible says, be ready always to give an answer to anyone who asks you a question for the hope that is in you. In other words, when people ask you, why do you believe in Jesus? Why do you believe that God exists? The Bible says that we're supposed to be prepared to give them an answer. But how many times do parents, they just tell their kids, you're going to be under attack when you go to school. You're going to be told Christianity isn't true. You're going to be told the Bible isn't true. That you're going to be told that God doesn't exist. We just tell them basically, just take the attack. But we don't give them the resources that they need to defend themselves against that attack. How many of us would send our kids out on the streets knowing that they're going to be beat up and not try and teach them some way to defend themselves. It would be crazy knowing that they're going to be beat up. So the point is, today we're going to talk about how to defend this concept of the existence of God, because the truth is, the idea that God exists is the most logical explanation that's ever been given. You'll often hear people say that religion was just created to make sense of things that people didn't understand. Well, if you look around the world, every single country, every single nation, they all had the same thing. They all had this belief in a God. They all looked around and said the most logical thing is that there is a God that exists. And then people say, well, yeah, that was in the past. That's what people said when they didn't understand things. But now it's different. Now we have science. But yet, if you look around, the majority of the world still believes in God because God is still the most logical answer. And the truth is, we don't have to, when people ask us about our faith, we don't have to just say, well, there's no reason for it. Because there is a reason. There is a logical explanation for the existence of God, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. So that's the main objective of this lesson, to teach that anyone can defend their belief in the existence of God intelligently. I know that we have experiences, right? Every single one of us could probably give an experience where we felt like God was working our life, where God was doing things, and we knew God was there. So we could give experiences, but today we're going to talk about how to defend our beliefs in the existence of God intelligently, using logic, things like that, by understanding these three concepts. First, the first cause concept. Second, the teleological concept. And third, the moral concept. The first cause concept. This will be the strongest of my three arguments, and if after I'm done with it, it doesn't seem like it's a very good argument, it's because I'm a bad communicator. It's not because it's not a strong argument. I just probably didn't say it very well. The first cause argument basically proves, not suggests, but proves that there had to be something eternal, and it most likely must have been an eternal being. So let's get into that. The question becomes, if to every effect there is a cause, then what caused the first effect? The reason that I really love this argument, this concept, is because anyone can use it, right? It's just using logic. I remember I was actually at the lake. Went there to go and pray, and I was at the reservoir, the dam, and somebody called me, and it happened to be an atheist buddy of mine, and I thought, well, maybe God brought me here for a reason. Maybe he wanted me to talk to this guy. So I answered the phone, and he's, of course, trying to tell me I'm silly for believing in God. And I said, tell you what, bro, where did you come from? And he says, my parents. I'm like, oh, smart answer. I'm like, where did your parents come from? He said, well, they're parents. I'm like, where did the first human beings come from? He's like, oh, well, they evolved from a different species. I'm like, okay, where did that species come from? Well, they evolved from goo. Where did that goo come from? Well, it evolved from the elements. Well, where did the elements come from? Where did all the elements in the universe, where did the universe itself come from? Like, what was the first cause? What was the first thing that caused the first effect? What created the very first thing? And he goes, maybe an alien created it all. I'm like, you're saying some being outside of the universe created the universe. I thought you were an atheist. Because the thing is, that's kind of the concept of God, isn't it? That there was a being out there that created everything. The first cause argument suggests that there had to be something eternal. And let me explain why. If we think of cause and effect like a link, every link has a cause, right? So for example, that light above us, you don't have to look at it because that would be bright. But that light above us, if it was just a fall, we wouldn't say, oh, that was random. No, we'd say there was some reason behind it falling, right? To every effect, there is a cause. We would say something caused it to fall, whether it's time, maybe it deteriorated over time, maybe it's the wind from the fans blowing or the air conditioning blowing, maybe some kid threw a ball at it earlier, whatever it might have been, we would say something caused it to fall. But what about the very first effect? What caused the very first effect? Well, whatever that thing was, it had to have always existed. You want to know why? Because if it didn't always exist, if at some point it didn't exist and then suddenly it did exist, we'd have to ask the question, what caused it to exist? What caused it? What created it? And then we ask the question, what was the thing? Who created it? So the very first thing to create, the thing that was first created must have been created by something that's always existed. Does that make sense? I don't know. All right. So it had to be something eternal, something that's always existed. Logic demands it that the very first effect had to be caused by something that's always existed. Now, scientists, specifically atheistic scientists, people who look at the world as if God didn't exist, they understand this. And this kind of messes their theories, right? Because if they say the universe is billions of years old, but then they say that something eternal, if they say that the universe has a beginning, then the question becomes, what started it? So a lot of scientists, they'll really struggle with this, but oftentimes you'll hear this concept, well, maybe the universe is eternal, which let's just pretend that doesn't contradict a lot of things that they've already told us, such as the universe is billions of years old. And for example, if the sun has a lifespan of, let's say, 6 billion years, I have no idea, well, then why hasn't it run out of energy if it's eternal? How do you apply time to something that had no beginning? So anyways, let's just pretend that was possible, that the universe was eternal. Everything that's in the universe has always existed. It still doesn't answer the question, what caused the first effect in the universe? What caused everything to be the way that it is? Even if the universe has always existed, let's imagine that it was just an infinite ball of energy and matter just sitting there, kind of like the Big Bang concept. And what caused it to blow up, right? What caused it to expand? What caused the universe to be this way? Well, you could say, well, maybe time. Over time, it exploded and became the universe that we have. Well, what caused it to explode? Well, you say time. Well, what is time to something that's eternal? What is time to something that has always existed? You can't apply time to something that is infinite in time. So the question becomes, well, what if an asteroid came and hit it? Well, then we ask the question, what made the asteroid? What made the asteroid be going in that movement? What caused the effect of the asteroid being in movement? So however you look at it, there had to be something eternal, and it had to be a being, an eternal being who could make a choice to cause the first effect. Because if it was an inanimate object, let's say a rock just sitting in space, it can't do anything, right? The rock isn't doing anything. It had to be a being that could make choices. So this concept of the first cause argument demands that there had to be something eternal, and it very much explains that it had to be an eternal being. And of course, this is how the Bible describes God, does it not? The Bible describes an eternal being, a self-existent being, which is how God is described as creating the universe, as causing the very first effect. So even just looking at things in a logical way, the world, the logic, just demands that there had to be an eternal being. So when professors or scientists or whatever, atheists in general, if they claim God's not logical, well, God is the most logical explanation that we have so far. All the things that they've proposed so far doesn't make sense. And I heard an argument one time, I think it was William Craig. He was arguing with a professor. It was a academic argument or academic discussion, and William Craig mentioned this first cause argument. And the only argument against it that this professor could give was, well, why is that the only option? Well, how about you give us another option? Because it seems like that is the only option. It's deduction. But the point is, the first cause argument shows us logically that there had to be an eternal being to cause the first effect. So next we have the teleological concept. This is the weakest of my three arguments, but it's still a really good argument because the only argument I've ever heard against it is to just deny that it's even an argument. So the teleological argument fights for the idea that the evidence for the intelligent designer. So not only was there an eternal being that caused the first effect, but the teleological argument argues that this eternal being was an intelligent designer. So the question becomes, if we know something is designed by whatever it might be, observing its structure, complexity, purpose, then should nature be considered designed? Have you ever wondered how we can tell if something is designed? I mean, looking around in this building, why do we know that this chair that we're sitting on is designed? Why do we know that this pulpit is designed? Why do we know that this Bible with all its letters and things, how can we just look at it and understand that this is clearly designed? Somebody designed this. And I don't know the exact answer to that, but somehow we know, right? Could it be that there's complexity? Could it be that there's structure? Could it be that there's patterns that we look at and say, obviously someone designed it to have this structure, someone designed it to have these patterns, someone designed it to have this complexity, and then of course we can see purpose. We can look at a chair and we can say, it has cushioning. What's the cushioning for? It has a purpose, right? The designer designed it for a purpose, and the purpose was to make it more comfortable. Why does it have legs? To hold it up. Why does it have a back? So that we can lean back against the back and feel more comfortable. So we look at a chair, something as simple as a chair, and we say, that obviously was designed. This thing has so much purpose. We can clearly tell that it's designed. We look at a book and we look at all the different pages, we look at how it's made, and we look at all the letters, and we start seeing patterns and structures and numbers and things like that, and we say, obviously this didn't randomly just pop up out of nowhere. Someone created this. Someone designed this. But what about a tree? A tree, as you can tell, is much more structured than a chair. A tree is much more complex than a chair. A tree has much more purpose than a chair. And I remember on YouTube sometimes I'll make videos, shorter videos, so that it's easier to watch. And one of the videos I made was about this argument, and I got into a little bit of a discussion with someone in the comment section, and they said, how dare you assume that a tree has purpose? Like, everything about a tree has purpose. The leaves have purpose, right? The branches have purpose. The roots have purpose. Everything about it has purpose. Even the leaves, they soak in the sun rays from photosynthesis and stuff like that. The water soaks in the ground, and the roots soak it in, giving it life. We can eat the fruit. Even the Bible describes the fruit being for eating. We look at the different aspects of a tree, and everything about it has purpose. But if it has purpose, then it must have design. If it has design, it must have a designer. What about our DNA? We talked about how we can tell something is designed maybe by its structure, maybe by its patterns, maybe by its complexity, or maybe by its purpose. But does that not apply to our DNA? Does our DNA not have patterns? Does our DNA not have complexity? Does our DNA not have purpose? Everything that I am, except for my weight, that was a choice. Everything that I am is based on my DNA, my hair color, my eye color, my skin color. All these different things is based on my DNA. And you want to tell me that DNA has no purpose? Obviously it has purpose. If it has purpose, does that not point to the fact that it was designed? If it was designed, does that not point to the fact that there was a designer? What about every part of our body? Our skeletal system, does it have purpose? Yeah, it would be pretty difficult to get around without it. Our foot, even something as simple as a foot, has a purpose. Our lungs bring oxygen to our body. Our heart pumps the blood throughout our body. Every aspect of our body has purpose, has structure, has complexity, but yet we look at a water bottle and say, yeah, that was designed, but I wasn't designed. I just was an accident. How can we look at something so simple and think that it's designed, but then we look at something so complex and say that just happened by accident? Even something as small as an atom has the same things, has purpose, has complexity, all these different things. We look at every proton, every electron, every neutron, every single part of that has a purpose, but yet for whatever reason, we look at that and say, that happened by accident. That wasn't designed. Why is it that we look at a book and say it's designed, but we don't look at an atom, which the book is made up of, and we say that's not design? If there is design, which I believe it's very obvious that it is designed, but if there is design, then there must be a designer. Further proof in the existence of an eternal being that designed the world with a purpose. And of course, the only argument I've ever heard against this is just to say that there isn't design. So the only argument is just to deny that there is even an argument. But the point is, when we look around, we can see things within nature that makes it very clear things are designed. My third argument is the moral concept. It's this idea that morals exist, therefore God exists. Have I lost anyone so far? I talk pretty fast. Okay, nobody's raising their hand, so either you're completely clueless and don't even know what to ask, or I'm explaining it well enough. So anyway, so now we got to the moral concept. And if you guys have more questions about this, you can talk to me. I probably won't have any better answers. But there's ways that you guys can research this stuff and probably find better explanations than what I can give. But hopefully this at least whets your appetite. So we've already talked about the first cause concept, which basically says there had to be something eternal. And this thing that was eternal was most likely a being, which is what the Bible describes God as being. Then we also talked about how there had to be, if there is design to nature, then there had to be a designer, an intelligent designer, in which the Bible also describes God being someone who created the heavens and the earth. It says nothing was made without him. So now we're going to talk about the moral concept. The moral concept is basically this idea that if morals exist, then God must exist. And the only people I've ever heard deny that morals exist tend to be more atheistic, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. The question: if something can only be right or wrong if it has purpose, and if something can only have purpose if it was created, does the existence of morals imply a creator? So let's talk about what we would deem as right and wrong. So let's give the example of a light switch. So everyone here knows what a light switch does, right? We understand the purpose of a light switch. The person who designed a light switch designed it to turn the light on or to turn it off. Now, if you were to walk into a dark room, maybe you get your flashlight on your phone or something, and you see the light switch and you say, okay, I'll flip that on. You flip it on and it doesn't come on. Would you say that something went right, or would you say something went wrong? Wrong, because it's not following the purpose that it was made for. Now, if you flip it on, I don't know if you guys regularly say, that was right. But the point is, if you flip it on and the light turns on, you know that something went right because it's following the purpose. In order for something to be right, it must be following the purpose it was created for. In order for something to be wrong, it must be going against the purpose that it was created for. So, for example, and who decides, by the way, who decides what a thing's purpose is? Well, the Creator decides it. The person who created the crowbar did not create it for a building tool. They built it for a tearing down tool. Though how many of us have used a crowbar as a hammer at some point? Can't find a hammer, so you just use a crowbar instead. Now, when I use a crowbar as a hammer, I understand I'm not using it in the right way because that's not the function of a crowbar. But yet I can still use it that way, in that particular sense. But the point is, the person who created it decides what the purpose of the creation is for. So the person who created the phone, they didn't create it as a hammer, though I think iPhones could clearly be used for that purpose. But the point is, an iPhone, the person who created the iPhone did not create it as a hammer, right? He created it as a communication device. A hammer was not created as a communication device. It was created as a building tool. So the person who creates decides the purpose of the thing that they created. So this is why morals come into question when it comes to people who don't believe in God, because if you were to say that there is such thing as right or wrong, there's such things as morals, universal morals. So, for example, is murder wrong in just our culture? Is it wrong in every culture? If you believe that it is wrong in every culture, chances are you believe in a creator, because in order for something to be wrong, it has to have purpose. Because you can't say to something that has no purpose, like, let's say I saw a rock laying outside, and let's say this rock had no purpose. I wouldn't go to the rock and say, you're doing the wrong thing, rock. Well, the rock has no purpose. I can't say to the rock, you're doing the right thing. The rock has no purpose. But if something has purpose, then it can do something right or it can do something wrong. So if there is such thing as right or wrong, such as is murder right or is it wrong, then there must be purpose. And if there's purpose, there must be a creator, someone who created it and decided its purpose. So when we were created not to kill. So when we kill, is it wrong or is it right? It's wrong, because we're going against the purpose that we were created for. So then the question becomes, what about adultery? Adultery is a good example of this. Whenever we come into a covenant relationship with a spouse and we become a monogamous relationship, exclusivity, we say, I'm yours forever, you're mine forever, stuff like that. You're my only one, things like that. So when someone commits adultery, we wouldn't say that's right to do, that's the right thing to do in a relationship. Why? Because it goes against the purpose of marriage. They entered a covenant relationship in marriage, and the purpose of that marriage was to make them one. And if they go outside of that relationship, that's considered wrong. If they stay inside that relationship, it's considered right. So in order for something to be right or wrong, it has to have purpose. In order for there to be purpose, it must have been created. So the reason atheists often go against this whole idea that there is such thing as right and wrong is because they believe that there is no God. And if there is no God, then there is no such thing as right or wrong, because there is no purpose. Have you guys ever heard the concept that we're all just accidents? Yeah. It's this idea that there is no God, so there is no purpose. And what a depressing thought to think that if we're all just accidents, there's no such thing as right or wrong, because there's no purpose, and therefore we could do anything we wanted. So if morals exist, then God must exist. There must have been a creator that created us with a purpose. The Bible describes God as creating us with a purpose. The Bible describes God as giving us certain commands, telling us there is a difference between right and wrong. Though people will say that there is no such thing as moral absolutes, the Bible makes it very clear there is such things as moral absolutes. So if there is a purpose, there is a designer, and that is what the Bible describes God as being. In conclusion, wow, I don't know if this was really fast. Let me check my phone. It was pretty fast. You guys were so quiet. I just went right through it. Didn't even pay attention. Well, you guys get a quick sermon today. In conclusion, we talked about 3 different areas. We didn't really use a lot of scriptural evidence, even though what we've talked about, does it not echo the Bible, talking about there being an eternal being, an intelligent designer, a designer that created us with a purpose? Does this not communicate what the Bible communicates to us? I often say that scientists are just trying to catch up to what the Bible has already told us. The point is, even just using logical arguments, it proves or even strongly suggests that the God of the Bible is the most logical thing to believe. So when professors, they tell our kids, or I don't have kids, but if I do, I'm sure a professor will tell our kids, when they tell our kids there's no such thing as God, when they start mocking them, making them feel like they're dumb for believing in the existence of God, does this not show us that there had to be something eternal? Makes sense. That's the only logical explanation, and that this thing was likely a being, just like the Bible describes. The teleological concept tells us that if there is design within nature, which seems very abundantly true, then there had to be a designer, and therefore the God of the Bible describes himself as being an intelligent designer, one who created everything. Nothing was created without him. And then we get to the moral concept, this idea that there is such thing as right and wrong, and if there is such thing as right and wrong, then we must have purpose, and if we have purpose, then we must have a creator, and the God of the Bible describes himself as being that creator, describes himself as giving us purpose, and therefore I believe it's still the most logical explanation that has ever been proposed. Whew. So anyways, I guess we're going to pray because I'm done. I'm not going to ask you guys if you have questions. If you guys have questions, you can ask me later. But anyways, let's go ahead and pray.